Houston lets one slip away and is absolutely kicking themselves about it, 70-67 in Ames, Iowa.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether a Houston fan or just a hater came stop by, and there might be a few of you out there tonight. Thank you for making us your first listen of the post game, first listen the next morning, or first listen anywhere in between. Today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at Mazda. We're breaking down Houston's letting one slip or falling apart a little bit down the stretch in Ames, Iowa State. Houston remains, defeated. I would say remains the opposite of undefeated in Ames, Iowa as a member of the Big 12. I'm talking about how this one really did slip away, and I think that's probably the most painful part of this one for the Cougs. I want to talk some about the scoring droughts. There were two of them that were fairly noticeable. I also think if we're looking and being most honest with ourselves, that the opening on the road and the freshmen, all that kind of feels more understandable in a lot of ways, but let's get on to it. Houston lets this one slip away. They're up 10 with about 7 minutes to go. There's a Kingston 3 to get him to 20 points, and it feels like things are rolling. And it goes on, and there's a very controversial kicked ball call. Controversial because it was wrong. I guess that's the controversy. Is there's a kicked ball call that was wrong with a few minutes to go. The crowd was dead. Houston was kind of rolling. The kicked ball defeated a trap that was leading to a Houston fast break. Clearly on replay, no kick ball, but they called it. You can't review it. The ensuing sideline out of bounds play results in a immediate 3-point basket for Iowa State, and the crowd is right back in it. Now, I am not one to blame officials. Houston had several minutes to not let that beat them, but they ultimately did, and that was the wrong call, right? And I think that's an important momentum swing in this one to keep track of. Honestly, other big part of this game, that same second half stretch, was Emanuel Sharp, who had 16 first half points and kind of carried the load in the first half, was unavailable for large stretches over 10 minutes of the second half with his 4 fouls sitting on the bench. We're used to seeing JoJo Tugler get into foul trouble, and Emanuel Sharp was the one in foul trouble in this one, and he is such an important part of this offense in these tight games we saw in the first half. Frankly, having that option there would have been a big benefit, especially in that stretch. There was a 10-0 scoring run where Iowa State, once Houston went up 10, to kind of even the game out over a course of time, that Houston had chance after chance after chance and couldn't get a basket. Having Emanuel out there to get one would have been, let's just say, well appreciated. This thing was also super close and nitpicky in other spots too. The Heisey 3 in the corner that ultimately gives them their final lead there at Iowa State. He barely had enough time, if you go back and watch that, to get the ball off. He catches and releases in milliseconds. It's an awkward release with Kingston Fleming's closing out, the shot clock winding down. And, of course, it splashes at the bottom of the net. He ends up being, I believe, the second leading scorer. He had 11 points, and no one had more than 12 at Iowa State, right? He's a bench guy that's made some important plays. I don't mean to diminish his role in the team, but he's not like a guy you scout we have to shut him down, right? These several moments like this in that basketball game that just don't quite go Houston's way. And look, there were moments that did too, right? I mean, they say that this Houston had, all things were wrong. Houston had a 10-point lead on a top 10 team on the road in their place in one of the most hostile environments in America, and they just can't quite seal it. Now, I will say, I said at the start of this gauntlet, I said at this gauntlet where you have Iowa State on the road tonight, you've got Arizona next weekend, and at Kansas next Monday, that they were going to lose one of those 3 games. If this is it, you end up learning from this and winning 2 big ones next weekend, it may feel off or not. I do think, though, that at the end of the day, you're going to feel like you probably should have had this one because you were up 10 in the driver's seat at the 7-minute mark, and you just couldn't quite finish it. You couldn't quite seal the deal. I thought Miles Houston played really, really well in large stretches of the night tonight. his missed free throw at the front end of a 1-and-1 at kind of a need to get points kind of possession for Houston really proved monumental because of the way that the rest of the game shaped out after that. And so it's just one of those things where like this, and he's an over 80% free throw shooter this season. Like it's just these little itty bitty things that just add up, and that's how you lose these super close matchups. Now, in the big picture, yes, you let one slip on the road. I guess technically that means you're tied for first in the Big 12 with Arizona as opposed to having the outright first place shot, which makes next Saturday that much more important, right? And all kinds of chaos around that. And you're competing for a 1 seed. You want to be a 1 or a 2 so you can get into the South Regional and go through Houston and all that. Those are all big, 3,000-foot looking issues. And a very micro issue, though, like the things that were wrong with this team would have been also wrong with this team had that Heisey shot missed and they made one more three. Right? Like the big picture things there would still have been there, and it's hard to like mask and cover that up in each of these things. I got people flying in with comments here. Talking about refereeing, heartbreaking loss, momentum killing, kick ball call. 10 in a row with less than 6 minutes left, calling a timeout. Sampson always last class. They had several stop balls. The 10-0 run, though, to me was not, I mean, the 10-0 run to me at the end with the stop ball, the deal there to me was not that they weren't getting good shots, weren't getting offense, they weren't making shots, and that was a really big problem. I look at, though, like what's going to call in a timeout. You only got a couple left at that point. You want to have them for some drawn up sets as they tried to draw up there at the end to lift Sanak and attack with Flemings when Fleming slipped down. And the possession we haven't really talked about yet. Houston is down 2. And I guess I should point out, after the Milo Smith free throw, Houston is down 2 and elects not to foul with 43 seconds left. And JoJo Tucker gets a block. Houston gets the rebound. They have about 20 seconds, like 19.5 seconds left with the ball and a timeout. They used one of those timeouts that they did not use earlier and drop a play. And the play attacks Flemings off of a phantom screen. It lifts Chris Sanak for some spacing, and Fleming slips. They're just, he just slips. Initially, I was like, did he get tripped? The TV angle was kind of awkward with some different fans back of their heads and stuff like that. And maybe he got slightly tripped by a little bit shoelace here or there, whatever, but that's not really the problem. Problem is he falls down, ball goes loose. Houston can't come up with it. I guess Sanak kind of like tries to flip a shot up or something, and it doesn't work, right? And then I would say gets the ball back, you foul. They missed the free throw, but Lipsy gets the rebound. That's all downhill from there. And this one's going to hurt because it was so winnable, and there's going to be so few teams that have the opportunity to say that about a road game in Ames, Iowa. You really had a chance to do something special out there. And I don't think that means that this team can't do special things. There's a chance that they, again, win at Arizona and win versus Arizona and win at Kansas. And we're saying, like, man, they learned their lessons in Ames, Iowa, and went on to win. I mean, remember the last time Houston lost at Iowa State, what happened the rest of Big 12 play that season, right? I mean, it was back in 2024, but Jamal Shed had one of the all-time great years the rest of the year. This is obviously later in the season. It's mid-February. That was early January, but it does feel like this suddenly creates an opportunity to learn from it. It also, I think, several people pointing out, but Alan just typed it in, so I'm pull his name up here. It kind of makes those two games feel like you got to get at least one, if not both of them. You certainly, if you want to win the conference, need to beat Arizona to kind of get the head-to-head matchup and get the one game up there. As daunting as that may seem, you do get them at home. We know how well Houston plays at Fertitta. Kansas is not the Kansas of old, but they're not the Kansas of bad days either. And you don't know what you're going to get out of Darren Peterson, all that on a big Monday. And you know that Fogg adds about 10 points or whatever they're doing. That's going to be a challenging game. Suddenly Saturday feels like a lot bigger deal because, again, you should have won that one. Now, that is all to say, like, to win the Big 12 in the regular season, to get a 1 seed and all that kind of stuff. I do think ultimately this team still progresses and grows a lot in the next month before March Madness. Sampson and his crew always do that. I want to talk more about that and droughts and scoring and all of that in just a second. But first, Today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at Mods, because Mods move the game forward for those who show there's more to the score than what's on the screen. Look, I really want to talk about Kingston Flemings in this game or Emanuel Sharp in the first half, but Chris Sinak and the rebounding effort throughout the second half, well, there was some stuff to be desired at various points in the offensive end or whatever. He had a tremendous rebounding second half, that grit, that effort. We've seen him in challenge before, off the floor, and media pressers and stuff like that, and he steps his game up when it counts. These remind us every day it takes to raise the bar, that extra work off the court, dialing in every detail, extra fire, extra grit, extra never quit, the same passion into every model. Highlights make the real. What it takes to get there is what makes it count. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you. Today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel, because if you ever want to experience the NBA Finals in person, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on an NBA future, and you're automatically entered for a shot to win a trip to the NBA Finals for two. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board, thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to get in and lock in that action. Right now, you can only not only pick in your cash, we can also send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on the NBA future. Get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Parker Ainsworth locked on Cougs here. And look, I feel like this team went through scoring droughts in the first half. You're weathering a storm on the road. You give up a 10-0 run. They do call a timeout at that point after that one. And ultimately talk it through, and they come out and they kind of settle, right? They go back to the veterans. They go back to Emanuel. Emanuel has 16 first half points in a game where you're on the road. You're kind of leaning into those older guys. Look, I think that's very typical, understandable. You expect that out of veterans, right? The more challenging one was the 10-0 run in the second half when Kingston makes a three with about 7 minutes left. I'm going to pull up my play-by-play here. With about 7 minutes left in the game, Kingston makes a three off the right wing. It gets into 20 points. And ultimately, let me make sure that, yes, that is 7 minutes left, 7:15 left in the game. And you feel like, okay, that takes you to 10. Don't need to quite trade baskets, but let's just continue to play competitive basketball here. We ought to be okay. And then the wheels fall off. You have possessions with turnovers. You have a blocked shot. You have a missed rebound. You have one and done shots here. And ultimately, that 10-point lead at 7:09 turns into very quickly an 8-point lead. And then a couple minutes later, after a turnover from a bad pass, becomes a 7-point lead. And then after the missed kick ball becomes a 4-point lead. Like, the thing just keeps on shrinking, excuse me. And those are the kinds of moments that, the drought itself builds up over several minutes. But it's when you need your guys in. And this second half drought happens with Emanuel on the bench with those fouls. And he's going to be kicking himself because they were both legitimately called fouls. There wasn't some problem with the call or whatever. And he's reaching in spots there in both instances that he just didn't need to be. and I just feel like ultimately that's problematic in a bit. Like, he's got to find ways to unfold. The same way we talked about JoJo finding that ways. And JoJo, to his credit, did find ways to stay on the floor. Now, other factors in this game, I mentioned I thought Houston was going to have an advantage in that they got to the free throw line. If you went back and watched and listened to the preview, I thought, okay, Houston's got an advantage. They get to the free throw line more. Iowa State was able to double them up in free throws attempted. Now, they didn't double up in makes. Iowa State was only 11 for 22 from the line, but Houston was 7 of 11, missed the front end of a 1-and-1 for one of those. They should have had more free throws, should have attacked the rim and gotten more free throws. The size of Iowa State can be daunting, but you have to punish them and punish their physicality the same way you see many teams try and punish Houston. You also saw Houston shoot the ball poorly from behind the arc. They finished at 35%, but they had those two different stretches. They shot very poorly. At some point, to break those stretches up, you've got to attack the rim. Again, you might get free throws, you might get layups. You got to attack the rim and just could not put pressure on the rim there. Both teams passed the ball well, I thought. Interestingly enough, neither team turned the ball over a whole lot. Now, Houston turned over 7 times, which is actually fairly typical for them this year. They are typically at 8 or under in these big-time games, but they were only able to turn Iowa State over 3 times. Iowa State is not going to give you the basketball. Yes, I know a major one gets wiped away with the kickball, phantom kickball thing, but even at 4, you would anticipate Houston's ball pressure, even on a good team, even against a Final Four caliber team, forcing a few more turnovers, and not necessarily to even turn them into points for Houston, but to ultimately take away those points at some point from Iowa State. Now, after a gigantic rebounding second half, Houston does ultimately win the rebounding battle 35-31. But again, I really thought that Houston was going to win that, and let's just say both halves by 5 or 6, and kind of come away with that as well. I feel like this just missed a few things here and there. It's just these small, slight margins, right? We talked about this in the pregame before the game today. In these games that are going to have these slight razor thin margins, only forcing 3 turnovers, only getting 35 rebounds, only getting 9 offensive rebounds, allowing 8 offensive rebounds, right? Those kinds of things make such a big difference. I didn't realize till checking the stat sheet after, speaking of razor thin differences, Houston never, with all the speed Kingston Flemings has and the 2-point guards on the floor and how much faster they're playing this year, never got out in transition for any fast break points. 0 goose egg fast break points from Houston in this one. And I'm flabbergasted. I'm not saying they're a team that's going to run up and down like, UNLV in the 90s or whatever. This is a team that you would think the transition off of turnovers would get you some at some point. And it didn't. And it didn't. And that's where you're at. And that's where you're at. Now, I don't think all is lost. I will say that, I thought you had a couple good things from Mercy Miller, a couple not so good things from Mercy Miller. I thought you had some good things from Chase McCarty, some not so good things from Chase McCarty, some good things from Isaiah Harwell, 1 or 2 bad things from Isaiah Harwell. I think those things kind of went back and forth. And honestly, if you're learning from those spots, getting those, Mercy had a dunk of the year kind of dunk, right? If you're learning from those spots and working through those things, I think you'll take it. But ultimately, we're looking at this 3-game stretch as 0-1 to start. And so we're looking at what that means and opening it like this, what that could mean in just 1 second. But first, today's show is brought to you by our buddies at Indeed, because workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inboxes overflowing. The one position you have to fill is still sitting open with all that going on. Pressure's on. You need the right hire, the right for the job. Right person. The job is on Indeed sponsored jobs. Indeed sponsored jobs helps you reach people who actually fit what you're looking for: skill, experience, location. So you're not just hoping for the right candidate stumbles across your post. You're actually going out and finding them. There's a stat that says it all. In the minute I'm talking to you in this ad, I've been talking to you for companies for a minute, and the companies like you have made 27 different hires on Indeed according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed-sponsored jobs. Whoa, that was bad. And spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates, check all your boxes, less stress, less time, and more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is the job for Indeed-sponsored jobs. Listen to the show and I get $75 Indeed-sponsored job credit to help your job get the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Support your show by saying, support the show by saying you heard about us on Indeed.com/podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Turn to apply. Need to hire. This is a job for Indeed-sponsored jobs. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Cougs here. And I did want to wrap. We're going to jump over to the Locked On College Basketball squad show in a second, where I get to, I'm sure, catch the jokes from a bunch of other folks. But starting off this stretch, this gauntlet of 3 games against top 10 teams in Kansas, in Arizona, and in Iowa State tonight with a loss does kind of create this like opening chapter issue. Now, I don't know that makes the other 2 games must wins, but I do think it makes them like must get betters. And I think that what's gonna be interesting is how this team grows between now, Monday night, and Saturday. The biggest gap in this run here, because what you're gonna see is a team that flies home tonight. They're probably on the way to the airport or whatever as we're talking. Flies home tonight. Tomorrow morning or tomorrow during the day, they'll individual work, rehabs, and whatever, and video. And I'd imagine between now and Saturday, because of the time, you have both a complete breakdown of every single possession of this game, as well as how it cannot happen and will not happen on Saturday. And I I just I don't I don't necessarily think that that means you automatically win against Arizona. I'm not trying to go anywhere down that route. I do feel like though, like ultimately, you're going to see this team make a big step forward. They also play at home next Saturday. We know Fertitta is going to be raucous. The tickets are stupid expensive on all the different places. Now, the best place to get those tickets is Game Time. That's what tickets, lowest price guaranteed. But super expensive, relatively speaking, everywhere you go. Um, and and ultimately, I feel like what you're going to see is improvements made. Now, some of that will become what you're playing at home. So those role auxiliary players will be playing better, may get some more points, add some different guys. But I think also you're going to see a little bit more crispness and things like that. There were moments tonight where, like, okay, so there was a defensive rotation where JoJo Tug was playing up at the line of scrimmage on a screen and hedging it. And he looks behind him, and there's a wide open dunk at the rim. And he looks at Milos. These are 2 guys that have been in the program for a long time. And they're like doing this thing where they're going back and forth. And it's like that just can't happen, man. And those 2 guys are like know it can't happen too, right? That's the thing, the frustrating part of that was like those 2 guys, if anyone know it can't happen, those 2 guys know it can't happen. And anyway, I feel like that's a problem. And I think you might see some of that kind of stuff fixed by Saturday. I also think that, frankly, like I mentioned, Houston had a big rebounding second half and not a big rebounding first half. I imagine they get challenged and come out the gate a little bit differently on Saturday. I also feel like you're going to see multiple guys with over 10 points, not just Kingston and Emmanuel. Um, it's not great. Not great. Now, do I think that like a Heisey type guy hits a corner 3 against Houston when Houston's playing at home? Probably not, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that happens when you're on the road more often than when you're at home, but we'll see. Look, the ultimate like thing about this one to me though, if I'm trying to be like optimist, positive, whatever, is yes, Iowa State gave you a lot of reasons to feel like you should have had the game. Right? Like you should have had it. They shot 50% from the free throw line. You were up 10 with 7 minutes to go. You were doing all the right, like things were going your way, and you went on a scoring drought, and they took it. Right? They took it. They took it from you. Slipped away from you, and kickball play or the snack contact getting knocked out, whatever single call, couple calls you want to go with. Ultimately, Houston did not score for a 4-minute stretch, and that lost them the game. Right. Also, it's February 16th. You're on the road in one of the toughest environments in America. Frankly, against a very well coached, very well oiled machine, top 6, I guess, at the time. They just beat Kansas last week. And you have every reason to believe you should have won that game. It means you got stuff to clean up. Potential just means you ain't done it yet. But I think that that's a positive sign moving forward. And I frankly feel like while I'm sure Tuesday practice, Wednesday practice will be tough, by the time you get to Thursday, Friday, I think you'll see the messaging shift like, hey, we should have had that one. We should have had that one. We should have had that one. Right now, you need Emmanuel to stay out of foul trouble. You need to make sure you get a little bit more defensively out of a couple of your bench guys, or a little bit more offensively out of the guys like the Harwells and Ramones, right? And then honestly, you can't go dry there for a 4-minute stretch. we'll see how things go. I'm gonna hop over to the Locked On College Basketball Squad show, so you're going to follow me over there for more breaking down of the night. And I'm sure I'll catch my fair share of flack over there. But Locked On Cougs, remember the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.